one of these was a local, one of them was a friend of mine who happens to be a clairvoyant, Maria Fix. Other lady, and she was with another person who saw this. Another townsperson, Carol Brady, out there, she's a real estate agent in Montauk. She saw a stealth airplane and was not surprised at all. She also has 3 boys who are blue-eyed and blonde hair, and she was very well aware that they were kidnapping people who were blue-eyed and blonde hair as late as, I think, '88. And she said the police were involved, they knew about this, and so this is another substantiation of Preston's story from a totally independent source. There's also Preston, after the book was written, he proceeded to introduce me to different people who have had various involvements in one way or another. One of the more interesting was a man who had worked as a contractor in the...
So there is evidence of activity there right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's also a connection to the programming of the boys with the maybe some of the twin research on twins that was done in the Nazi regime. I don't personally have a lot of information on that, but that's there's a lot of research on twins, psychosexual research on twins, psychic research that I believe was conducted by Dr. Mengele, the Nazi.
Mengele, you mean?
What?
Mengele?
Mengele.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you have any more information, but there is a connection between that and the blue-eyed, the blonde hairs of the Nazis, and also the Pleiadians. There's a legend with the Pleiadians and the blue eyes and the blonde hair, and there's a connection there as well. But I'm not prepared to elaborate on that myself.
Yeah, as with some of the Montauk was just hoarded with German scientists. This is something that my father was involved in before World War II, during and then after, is bringing some of these German scientists over. And hiding them in this estate, and then processing through, and then going into these other government projects. Which Montauk, I don't know, what did we figure? 30%, 40% were German-oriented scientists.
Oh, really?
Very, very heavy in that investigation. Of course, then there's the rumor that it's a bit more of a rumor that the Germans did have their working time machine back just prior to the war, and it involved sonics,
And lights.
They were stressing the electromagnetic field enough where it went from a potential form for doing work into a realize. And of course, everything is a potential, as the will can end tomorrow. Well, will it or will it not? The degree of it will or will not, and the potentiality, if there is enough information and can be directed and forced, then the potential becomes higher, and then it can do real work. So they had, it was you or Al have the information on that.
Well, that's appeared in a number of these supermarket rags, this idea of the Nazi time machine.
Yeah, but you guys had it independently of that.
Well, we've had people tell us of it, but we don't know how credible the people are. There's no real solid source of it, but there's enough reports coming in from what we consider to be independent people to say that there probably is some base to this rumor. How complete and how functional their time device was, we really don't know.
Yeah. There's also a question you asked earlier about the financing. And do you want to answer that, Preston?
Yeah. You remember there was a train robbery in Europe right after World War II where they were bringing Nazi gold and treasures out on this train. There's been a few movies made about it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Where they blocked off this tunnel and then the train was robbed. That's been traced. This has been backed up. Going through to Paris, and then it went on a boat and it went out to Long Island. The boat sunk off of Montauk Point, and what we believe happened is the people from Fort Hero or Montauk Navy Base went out with divers, recovered the gold and such, and the treasure was stashed in the underground at Montauk. This is what they used to run the project for years and years. Then when that money finally ran out, we're talking back in the 40s and 50s, billions of dollars. So in 60s, 70s, and 80s, God knows what it was worth. But when they ran out of money, then it was financed by the military-industrial corporate structure. Namely, the Krupps, IT&T, financed it. So remember, they couldn't have this appear as an appropriation in Washington. Because then Congress would ask, what are we spending all this money on?
Yeah.
So it was funded by all sorts of clandestine funds. And mostly it was a Nazi goal, from what we understand, and then it went over to ITT funding.
What other corporations and so forth have been involved in the project?
RCA was involved.
Rand?
Sperry Rand was involved. Hazeltine, we believe, was involved. AIL
Grumman?
was involved. No, Grumman didn't seem to be involved in it. I was handed a list of corporations by one of Senator Goldwater's aides, and today all those corporations are out of business or reorganized.
With a new name.
With a new name,
Oh, yeah.
new management. What's interesting to note here also is in the mid-'80s to late '80s, there was something coming around called a core audit, C-O-R-E, in the industrial plants. The excuse for this was looking for the $250 toilet seat. In this audit, they would send bean counters into each plant. They would go to every person in the plant, including the janitor, the floor workers, the people working on production. What are you working on? What does this tell us? If you're looking for the $250 toilet seat, that's management. The guy building this chassis on the floor, he knows nothing of what is charged for it. The fact that they went to everybody and was asked what you're working on, we were told at AIL, do not list. They told us what project to say we were working on. You know, what they were telling us is, well, we take money from this project to get this project going. You're supposedly working on this project. When the orders come in, don't tell them you're working here, but you're working on this project. The only thing that makes sense to me is they're looking for hidden projects. Of course, Montauk was a massive hidden project. And the government, the political government, learned its lesson. That you got to find these hidden projects. To find these black hole things they don't know of. They were stung once. The way we understand it, Senator Goldwater, before he retired, called for a joint session of the two houses, and he told the lawmakers that essentially the Montauk project was a project meant to control their mind on Capitol Hill. Because imagine how much blue smoke there was on Capitol Hill. At that point, this sent the whole congressional off on a rag towards the military-industrial establishment. This is why the military-industrial establishment is almost dead today. They don't dare squeak anymore. They've lost all the freedoms they had. Up until the whistle was blown, the military-industrial establishment had almost carte blanche. Nobody questioned them. Now they're questioned so heavily, the companies are worried, they're upset. The companies are being hit with fine for this, that, and the other thing as they find this stuff, and slowly but surely they're all going out of business.
Everyone is ESP. It's naturally occurring. It's typically in the levels of the third and fourth subconscious behavior, following the typical psychology aspect of things. Levels below conscious behavior. I think there's 12 typically is what they speak of.
That's what they generally talk of.
There are actually more when you speak of the esoteric, but it's levels third and fourth subconscious. That's if it has not been monkeyed with. Everyone uses their ESP daily. It's incorporated. It's the reason the ESP is kept away from the conscious to the degree it is because a person's connection to these alternate parallel zones, there's vast amounts of information. And the conscious behavior would become overwhelmed with it. So there's a necessary screening, filtering up to the subconscious, up to the conscious level.
Which is the evolutionary process, is it?
Right. So certainly there are the avenues can certainly become clouded with daily stresses and learn phenomenons and habits and such. And, most people do get an idea these days that some people who have these esoteric considerations, psychics, they do have something to it. But it's still kind of in the infancy that everyone has this naturally occurring process that is at their disposal and can be used to. We also speak of that long-term memory is used every day to reach this information zone called a akashic. It's an esoteric holding zone of information, and then everyone uses it daily for the long term. Extension of the energy outside the body to the zone and acquire it. But that's certainly, it's not standard stuff, and it is basic. It's basic in metaphysics. It's nothing new, but needs to be presented in a way which is non-threatening to the person and is natural. It's part of living and growing in children. It's they have these very strange and unencumbered sense of barriers, and they go out.
At Montauk in the 70s. He went down there and serviced the ampletrons. He saw, I think, 20 or 24 ampletrons underground, and he serviced them. He's a nuclear physicist, and he said there's no reason on Earth you would want ampletrons down there to amplify SAGE radar signals or transmissions. There's no reason for it unless they're doing something awfully strange or unusual. So that's a very interesting piece of information. Also, his assistant said that he had seen an antenna that had been serviced. This was in, I think, 1990 or thereabouts. An antenna in the transmitter building that was actually clean and serviced with a tag. There was also the woman, the real estate agent, told me that she said they were using that SAGE radar out there, and because she would see the big reflector moving. Now, Preston said there's no way that reflector could move. On further investigation, this physicist's assistant said that there is a hand crank, and it was recently greased so that you can actually, because the motor is dead to the reflector, but you can actually manually hand crank this radar reflector. So she was quite satisfied that thing had been being used. Now,
well, the motors are actually missing.
Oh yeah.
The crank that ran the reflector.
right, and there's other stories. One of the local historian out there had told me of an instance of him going to the base and seeing, and this is in '72, he brought a friend of his back from lunch to the base where it was heavily patrolled with people with, soldiers with guns, and one of the soldiers put a gun, as they drove up to the inner gate, right on his 3-year-old son. He told him to remove it from his son, and then he pointed it right at him. This is highly irregular behavior for what was considered in federal aviation or at the FAA radar facility. So there are many stories that would definitely corroborate that there was a secret project of a highly secure nature and highly debatable nature as to whether it had any validity. And perhaps we had shown you some pictures earlier of the programming room on the base. Now the programming room, what this was is we just recently discovered this. This is a room with, one is a psychedelic room with graffiti-looking stuff that's painted in a pattern by an artist. Another one is a black and white room. Another one is a paisley room, and then there's a leopard-striped room, which reminds us of the Timothy Leary experiments in the 60s. This could have been going on in the 60s. So this is like very hard evidence that something of an irregular nature was going on at the base. And as I'm saying, we've also had Helga Morrow contact us. Helga is a woman whose father was involved in the Philadelphia and Montauk projects. Helga, her father, his name was Frederick Cuppers. She has evidence that her father did not die in, I think it was 62, like was believed, because the hair on his hands was inconsistent with the man's in the coffins. And she was surrounded by trench-coated men at the time as well. So she came here and visited us, and there was a lot of interesting collaboration with her and Preston and Duncan. But and she can go on ad infinitum about this. So I think that my main, basically what I have to say is there's a lot of independent source. there's also Preston. After the book was written, he proceeded to introduce me to different people who have had various involvements in one way or another. One of the more interesting was a man who had worked as a contractor in the...
So there is evidence of activity there right now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's also a connection to the programming of the boys with the maybe some of the twin research on twins that was done in the Nazi regime. I don't personally have a lot of information on that, but that's there's a lot of research on twins. Psychos. I was not surprised at all. She also has 3 boys who are blue-eyed and blonde hair, and she was very well aware that they were kidnapping people who were blue-eyed and blonde hair as late as, I think, '88. And she said the police were involved. They knew about this, and so this is another substantiation of Preston's story from a total sexual research on twins. Psychic research that I believe was conducted by Dr. Mengele, the Nazi.
Mengele, you mean?
What?
Mengele?
Mengele.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you have any more information, but there is a connection between that and the... and one of these was a local... one of them was a friend of mine who happens to be a clairvoyant, Maria Fix. Other lady, and she was with another person who saw this. Another townsperson, Carol Brady, out there, she's a real estate agent in Montauk. She saw a stealth airplane